50 kilometers south of Mecca, there is a line in the sand you can see from space. On one side, nothing. Bare rock. Dust that has not held water in decades. The kind of landscape where rain does not save you, it destroys you. Flash floods rip through, strip the soil, and vanish into the Red Sea before a single plant can take a drink. On the other side of that line, a savannah, trees, grass so thick it brushes your knees, dragonflies, birds, a functioning ecosystem in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The difference between these two places is not rainfall. They get the same storms. It is not some experimental chemical treatment or a billion-dollar irrigation project. The difference is a pile of rocks. Specifically, 65 piles of rocks arranged in the right places at the right angles. That is it. That is the entire technology. And in 2019, after the rains finally came, this patch of dead earth captured 14 million liters of water in a single storm, more than twice what the math said was possible, and exploded into green. But here is what makes this story different from every other desert greening project you have heard about. The transformation did not happen while anyone was watching. It happened after the funding dried up, after the irrigation stopped, after 2 years of drought when the trees turned brown and the locals begged the project leader to truck in water to save what they had built. He refused. And that refusal turned out to be the most important decision of the entire project. This is how you terraform a desert with gravity, patience, and the courage to walk away. To understand what happened at Al-Baida, you first have to understand what killed it. This landscape was not always dead. For over 1,000 years, the tribes of this region ran a tight system of land management. Specific areas were protected, grazed only in rotation, and kept in reserve for drought years. No single patch of ground ever took continuous pressure. The result was a managed landscape that supported life despite brutal heat and minimal rain. Then, in the 1950s, the Saudi government nationalized the rangelands. The intent was modernization. The effect was ecological collapse. By removing tribal authority over who grazed where and when, the land became open access. What followed was predictable. Every herder maximized their flock because restraint no longer paid. If you did not graze a patch, someone else would. The government made it worse by subsidizing imported feed, so animals could survive on foreign grain while stripping the last plants from the soil. The failure cascaded in sequence. Tribes settled permanently. Grazing pressure became constant instead of seasonal. Trees came down for charcoal, the shade. Canopy vanished and soil surface temperatures climbed. The ground baked into a crust. Then the perennial grasses disappeared, and suddenly the soil was naked to the sky. Every raindrop hit bare earth like a tiny hammer, sealing the surface tighter. The ground became waterproof. When rain fell on this sealed landscape, it could not sink in. It became runoff instantly, sheets of water gathering into floods that scoured the riverbeds and carried everything to the Red Sea. The aquifers dropped. Wells had to be drilled deeper every year. The natural fodder vanished completely, locking the Bedouin into total dependence on government subsidies. By 2009, Al-Baida had reached a terminal state. Rocky, barren, lifeless. A place where the water cycle had inverted. Rain, the most precious resource in the desert, showed up as a flash flood, destroyed whatever it touched, and vanished. The region receives less than 60 millimeters of rainfall annually. That classifies it as hyper-arid. But here is the paradox that made everything possible. Historical records suggested this landscape should support savanna. The water was there, falling from the sky. It just moved too fast. The problem was not too little rain. The problem was time. In 2009, a permaculturist named Neil Spackman looked at this destroyed landscape and saw something most people would miss. The biological collapse, all that death, all that emptiness, was a symptom. The disease was hydrological. Fix the water and the biology would fix itself. His hypothesis was simple. You do not need to bring water to the desert. The desert already gets water. You need to slow it down. Think about a flash flood. Rain hits the hills, becomes runoff, gathers speed, picks up volume, and arrives at the valley floor as a wall of destruction moving fast enough to rip out anything in its path. The entire storm passes through in hours. Then it is gone. Now imagine stretching that out. Instead of all the water passing through in an hour, what if it took weeks? What if you could hold it on the landscape long enough for gravity to pull it down through the soil into the aquifer where roots could find it? That's the intervention. Slow the water down. The team started building in 2010 with local materials, the same rocks littering the ground, and local labor, 34 Bedouin workers. They built 3 types of structures, but the simplest one tells the whole story. Check dams. Dry stack stone walls built across gullies and seasonal riverbeds. They look ancient, almost primitive, but they are precisely engineered for one purpose. They slow water without stopping it. When flood velocity drops, the sediment drops too. Sand and silt settle behind the wall. Over years, these dams build up flat terraces of trapped soil. An erosive gully transforms into stepped planting beds, each one a sponge waiting for rain. 65. Check dams across the site. 15 kilometers of stone terraces on the slopes above, breaking long hillsides into short steps that capture sheet flow. 7 kilometers of swales level ditches that spread runoff horizontally and force it to soak in rather than run off. All of it positioned to turn the demonstration area into a giant funnel, harvesting water from the entire watershed above. The trees came next. Not fast-growing exotics, but species selected for extreme drought tolerance. Prosopis, acacia, ziziphus, moringa. All native or from similar climates, all capable of surviving on captured rainfall alone once their roots reach deep enough. That was the critical detail. A drip irrigation system supported the seedlings during establishment. The plan was to irrigate for 3 to 5 years, long enough for taproots to find the moisture the earthworks had stored underground. Then the system would be weaned, irrigation would stop, and the trees would either find water on their own or die. By 2015, the site was green and growing. The first major storm in 2010 had already validated the engineering. The earthworks captured between 10 million and 14 million liters, more than double what fell directly on the site. The system was pulling water in from the surrounding landscape, acting as a sink for the entire watershed. Everything was working. And then the funding stopped. In 2016, the project's funding evaporated. Administrative issues, nothing to do with technical performance. But the impact was immediate. There was no budget for diesel to run the pumps, and no money for labor. The drip irrigation system went dark. The trees were 4 to 6 years old. They had been drinking from pipes their entire lives, and the funding cut landed during a drought. For 2 years after the pumps stopped, almost no rain fell. The green started to fade. Trees that had not pushed their roots deep enough began to brown and wither. The visual progress of years seemed to reverse. The Bedouin who had built those terraces stone by stone watched their work dying. These were people who had spent months hauling rocks in brutal heat, who had protected the site from their own grazing herds, who had staked their hope on the promise that this land could provide again. They came to Spackman and begged him to save the trees. Truck in water. Find emergency funding. Do something. He refused. His reasoning was brutal in its logic. If the system required permanent life support, it was not a solution to desertification. It was a landscaping project, a green zoo that would bind the moment anyone stopped paying for it. The whole point was to prove the land could sustain itself. If he trucked in water now, he would never know if the earthworks actually worked. The refusal was not cold. It was a gamble, with years of labor and the trust of an entire community riding on it. Some trees died. The weak genetics failed. Underground, invisible to everyone watching the brown spread across the surface, the survivors were doing exactly what Spackman had bet on. Deprived of easy water, the acacia and prosopis roots drove deeper into the soil profile, chasing the moisture lenses that the earthworks had been building for years. The drought became a filter. It killed what could not adapt and hardened what could. 2 years, no irrigation, minimal rain. The project looked like a failure. Then the rains came back. Late 2018 into 2019, significant storms finally hit the Hejaz after years of drought. The swales and dams had sat unmaintained for 2 years, rock walls with no one to repair them, ditches filling slowly with wind-blown dust. But when the water came, they worked exactly as designed. They caught the runoff, they spread it, they held it, and the landscape's response was explosive. Within weeks, brown desert transformed into dense green savannah. The trees that had survived, the ones with roots deep enough to reach stored moisture, exploded with new growth. But the real surprise was what happened between the trees. Grass, wildflowers, fodder plants thick enough to brush your knees. None of it was planted. It grew from dormant seeds that had been sitting in the soil for decades waiting. The earthworks finally provided what those seeds needed: moisture that lasted long enough for germination and completion of their life cycles. The biological potential had been locked in the ground the entire time. The hydrology was the key. The comparison was brutal and obvious. Inside the project boundaries, green. Outside, receiving the same rainfall, bare rock and dust. The difference was not rain, it was water harvesting. The numbers tell the story. A 100-acre demonstration site, 65 check dams, 15 kilometers of terraces, 7 kilometers of swales, 14 million liters captured in a single storm, more than double what fell directly on the site. 0 pumps running since 2016. 0 irrigation. 0 external water inputs for over 2 years. Groundwater levels in the immediate vicinity rose measurably. Bird populations returned. Dragonflies appeared, indicators of standing water and insect abundance. Fungi emerged from the soil, a sign the underground carbon cycle had restarted. The project achieved what the team called 100% retention. All the water that entered the site stayed long enough to matter. And here is what separates Al Bayda from every other desert greening initiative. The Saudi Green Initiative has announced plans to plant 10 billion trees using desalination, treated wastewater, and constant pumping. Those systems demand enormous ongoing costs, energy, infrastructure, maintenance forever. Turn off the pump and everything dies. Al Bayda is the opposite. The 2 years without funding did not destroy the project. They proved it. The system had become the opposite of fragile. It got stronger under pressure. Abandonment was not failure. It was the final exam. There is a limit to scalability. This works in rocky terrain with hills that generate runoff, the western mountains of Saudi Arabia, and similar landscapes worldwide. It will not work in sand seas where water sinks instantly and there is no runoff to harvest. But for the landscapes where it does apply, Al Bayda rewrites the rules. What we call desert often is not truly barren. It is dormant. The seeds are waiting. The biology is ready. It just needs the right hydrological key. The conventional model for fixing a desert involves fighting it. Pump water from somewhere else. Keep the machines running forever. The moment you stop paying, the desert wins. Al Bayda flipped that logic completely. The most important thing that happened to the project was the thing that looked like disaster. The funding cut, the drought, the 2 years when everything seemed to be dying. That period was not a setback. It was proof that 65 piles of rocks placed correctly could capture enough water to sustain an ecosystem without any human intervention at all. Proof that the land remembered how to be alive once you gave it the tools. The Bedouin who built those walls wanted to save their trees with trucked-in water. They were right to care. But Spackman was right to refuse, because now they have something better than trees kept alive by pipes. They have a system that runs on gravity and rain, a system that survived abandonment and came back stronger. 2 years later, unrecognizable, not despite being abandoned, because of it.